speeches delivered by Daksha, heart-piercing. There's a certain level of criticism which is just heart-piercing and in that way devastating. And that's what happened to Lord Shiva. But here the sort of the challenging thing as far as understanding all of this is that Lord Shiva, generally we understand, and Srila Prabhupada points out very clearly, that Lord Shiva is a liberated personality. Lord Shiva is Atmarama, situated in complete self-realization. So it's an interesting question. How could a liberated person situated in complete self-realization become, at least we could say, somewhat distressed, somewhat disturbed by this very strong, very abusive, and just so intentionally insulting talk of Daksha, a transcendental personality. A transcendental personality, if they're glorified for being very wonderful, which they are, and oftentimes that will show, and people will see, oh, look, what a wonderful person. And so then they're glorified. But generally speaking, a great devotee like that, if they're glorified, they will just discount it altogether or just disagree strongly. If you've read Srimad Bhagavatam, Rita, or listened to the seminar we did on it, last year sometime, we went through the entire thing, and we saw there that in the first part, in which Narada Muni is trying to find out who is the most wonderful person, the most qualified person, then one after another, different persons are recommended to him that such and such is the most wonderful person, the most glorious person, the person with the greatest qualifications and most wonderful qualities like that. And so Narada Muni then goes to meet that person and glorifies them as he has heard the glories of that person from the person who pointed him to go there. So he glorifies whoever it is. But then that person turns around and says, no, I'm not glorious. Not only am I not glorious, but I'm completely out of it. That's basically the idea. Not only am I not glorious, but I am just totally lacking in any good fortune, good qualities, good fortune, mercy. Because the idea was, who has got the most mercy? That was ultimately the idea, although good fortune was also discussed. So yes, it's interesting that the great devotees They may be appreciated, they are appreciated in different ways, but they themselves feel they're completely lacking in qualification, in qualities, and they haven't really received any mercy. So Lord Shiva, Lord Shiva is one of those persons who is approached by Narada Muni. He's one of those persons, and he completely decries himself, and in many ways says that he's got no mercy from the Lord at all. So this is natural of a devotee, particularly an advanced devotee, to be transcendental to glorification, to be transcendental to criticism, and even to welcome criticism. But here, Lord Shiva is remembering the criticism he received from Daksha, and he's feeling heart sore. In a not really transcendental way. And so the question is, how could someone like Lord Shiva become disturbed when he remembers the insults? And Srila Prabhupada gives interesting explanation. His explanation is that because Lord Shiva is the incarnation in charge of the material mode of ignorance, tamagun, he is sometimes affected by the pleasure and pain of the material world. And then Prabhupada goes on to contrast, to point out the difference between the pleasures and pains on the material level and how people who are materially conditioned react to them, and the pleasures and the pains which may be there in the spiritual world, and how the devotees, particularly in the spiritual world, but even any more advanced devotees at least, but particularly in the spiritual world, they respond to pleasures and particularly in this case pains. It's very interesting. Of course, it's very interesting just the point that even though Lord Shiva is liberated personality, situated in complete self-realization, but because he has the service of dealing with the mode of ignorance, then in some situations he reacts in a way which reflects the influence of the mode of ignorance. Anyway, we'll let you all sort of meditate on that one. It's an interesting one. And we hope are you awake? Are you alive? Have we lost anyone? Has anyone given up their lives? That's one of the problems of being in this big space, that there's not so much contact and the tendency to drift away is a bit greater. Therefore, sometimes some devotees have the strategy in a situation like this, every so many minutes, make a joke, and then the devotees wake up. That was a joke, by the way. But still, it's true. But as I told you, as I've mentioned before, when I was a really new devotee in London, the idea came from America. It was imported from America, as all good things are. That's another joke too. Not much of a joke. in America, the devotee with the service called Temple Commander. Some of the temple commanders had adopted the ingenious practice of keeping a water pistol with them. And during the morning program, when devotees, at least someone or someones would inevitably fall asleep, he would squirt them with prasadam water, of course. It wouldn't be just tap water. Maybe we should do that, but I'd need a long-range water pistol. So yes, Lord Shiva, even though he's liberated personality, completely situated in self-realization, but because of his service and the conditions of his service, dealing with the mode of ignorance. And also, Prabhupada doesn't mention here exactly, but in other places Prabhupada definitely mentions that he is married to the personality who is the presiding deity of the material nature, Maya Devi, who has all the potency, all the potencies of all the different modes of material nature and just the complete potency of the material nature. And because of being in such close contact with her, like more or less 24/7, it has some effect on him. But still, even though it has some effect, as Prabhupada's pointing out here, it doesn't really mean he's become disqualified. Otherwise, generally, people who are influenced by the modes of material nature, like us, that those influences of the material nature, they create disqualification, spiritual disqualification, and sometimes the disqualification becomes so strong that some people even stop practicing Krishna consciousness altogether or practice much less, something like that. But here in the case of Lord Shiva, it's very interesting. He's the head of one of the sampradayas, and he's a great Vaishnava, Vaishnavanam Yata Shambhu. In one sense, he's the greatest of all the Vaishnavas, but sometimes, circumstantially, there is some effect on him and on his behavior coming from his closeness to the material nature. Anyway, that's a kind of very deep transcendental subject. And he's not the only one. We're going to be reading later, after some weeks or months, we'll read about Dhruva Maharaj, how he became great pure devotee, personal associate of the Lord, but then he became overcome by anger. So anyway, as we go through these types of things, we'll discuss the implications of these things, but it's a very interesting aspect of Krishna consciousness. I could mention, as I may have mentioned a few days ago, I did actually, how when Srila Prabhupada was in Mauritius, he gave a class in one temple explaining how Bhagavad Gita is beneficial because through following the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, you become transcendental and unaffected by the material nature and even by death. And one gentleman objected and said that, I don't think it works because Arjuna, if you remember, if you're awake, Arjuna, when his son was killed, his son Abhimanyu was killed in the Battle of Kurukshetra, Arjuna became just like inflamed with anger and took the vow to kill the person who was responsible for the death of his son Jayadratha, to kill him the next day. And if he failed, he would commit suicide. And it was just, he got into a very extreme state of mind, very emotional state. And so this man said, yeah, when his son was killed, he didn't just, relax and everything's okay because I'm Krishna conscious and my son's a spirit soul, etc. He became affected. And Srila Prabhupada made the point that it's natural to become affected in such a situation because we are not stones. We are not just rocks which have no feelings. We are persons. And as persons, we're full of feelings. But Prabhupada then made the point that the proof that Arjuna was actually qualified as a devotee and qualified in terms of Bhagavad Gita was that he continued doing his service. He didn't stop doing his service. He didn't stop his Krishna conscious activity, but he carried on. That being like the crucial point. So in the spiritual world, there's pleasure and pain also. Lord Krishna, Prabhupada mentions here, that Lord Krishna was chastised by Mother Yashoda. Of course, we remember the Damodar Leela and how Krishna got really upset and he cried. And he became angry and he reacted. He smashed the pot, the yogurt pot in which the yogurt was being churned into butter. He smashed it and it all came out on the floor. And then he was even more angry and he climbed up and smashed some pots that were hanging from the ceiling. Pots of various dairy products, and all of that came down. And then he started eating some butter, and after he'd had enough, he started feeding butter to the monkeys until they were overloaded with butter. And the monkeys were refusing. He was offering, come on, take it, take it. The monkeys were refusing. And Mother Yashoda came in, and Krishna, in his mischievous way, said to Mother Yashoda, just see, Mata, your butter is so bad, even the monkeys won't eat it. Because he knew it was a sensitive point with Mother Yashoda. Why? I give him all this butter. I give him kilos of butter. He can just eat as much as he likes. He has a little bit and he goes and steals some butter from someone else's house. So she had a sort of bit of a complex about her butter. And Krishna, in a mischievous way, even you could say transcendentally a little nasty way, he goaded her like that. Of course, it's all part of the transcendental exchanges, but then, then she tied him. He was crying, But as Prabhupada explains here, even though these things are happening like this, and even though Krishna himself sometimes seems to be distressed, and sometimes he irritates the gopis, and sometimes the gopis chastise him and tell him he's just something not very nice, and he reacts to that. But it's all on the transcendental level, and it's all just exchanges of bliss. And therefore, even though Krishna is crying and apparently disturbed, being chastised by Mother Yashoda, he is simply in ecstasy. Now, these are all transcendental, these are all different aspects of transcendental life. And in some cases, they contradict our experiences within this material world, how people act and react to different stimuli. And one devotee, I was just reading a few weeks ago, one devotee asked Prabhupada, how do we understand these things, these apparent contradictions? And at that time, Srila Prabhupada said, well, to find out, to understand, you will have to go there and become part of it, and then it'll become clearer to you. So, yes, but the situation of Lord Shiva becoming disturbed or unhappy because of the criticisms of Daksha, there's a type of material influence there due to his being in charge of the mode of ignorance and married to, in the constant association of the embodiment of the material nature. But still, it doesn't really affect his position of being liberated and situated in complete self-realization. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions? Jai, help us. Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Early on you mentioned about criticism.
About what?
Criticism.
Oh, criticism, yeah.
In Vaishnava etiquette we learn, under the heading Vaishnava Parad, we learn that we can criticize somebody in a constructive way to help them, and converse to that we can criticize them in a destructive way to destroy them. So in this case we see Daksha, and it's a classic case of Vaishnava Parad with Daksha and Lord Shiva in that pastime there.
Yeah.
Then the other point is that up to this point, Sati is like the favorite daughter of all the daughters of Daksha. And one would think that Lord Shiva, being the son-in-law, would be a beneficiary of the sentiments of Daksha, but we see the opposite. It's become the recipient of all the criticism, destructive criticism. Thank you.
That's a comment, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, a good practice for us as devotees is, if you can't, in our interactions, if you can't say something good about someone, don't say anything at all, or just talk about Krishna consciousness. Because aparad, Daksha, as a result of his aparad, he gets the head of a goat. Talk about, you know, sometimes a devotee makes a mistake, and like an embarrassing type of mistake, and other devotees find out about it. And the devotee, you know, therefore becomes a little bit of an object of, is in an embarrassing situation because others know, but not like what happened with Lord Shiva. That criticism was just so extreme. Very, very extreme. Initially, he didn't react at all. He just walked away. He just left without reacting. But here we can see that there's something's there. Something's there. At least some feeling of disappointment. He was sorry at heart, Srila Prabhupada says. He certainly maintains equilibrium, I mean basic equilibrium, but he's still unhappy because of the words of Daksha. So anyway, for ourselves, if we see that a devotee is apparently doing something wrong, then we definitely shouldn't just take that and spread the word and criticize them. If we see that a devotee is arguably doing something wrong, we should try and help them if we can, and if we can't, then we should try and get someone who could help them to try and help them. But criticism, you know, the idea of constructive criticism, it can easily become a pretty destructive type of thing, actually. Anyway, thank you. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.